Welcome back to the Indicator 13 Compliance Module series. This is Module 6, where we will be discussing Measurable Annual Goals, or MAGs. Just a reminder, if you have not already done so, please pause the recording and take the pretest. You will need your PPID number in order to complete the survey. The purpose of this series is to enhance the practices for writing compliant, transition-based IEPs and to broaden the foundation for effective practices related to Indicator 13 of the State Performance Plan. In Module 1, we covered agency invitation and participation and student invitation to the IEP. In Module 2, we covered age-appropriate assessment for transition. In Module 3, we discussed the post-secondary goal writing for education and training, employment, and independent living. In Module 4, we covered how to make sure that those post-secondary goals are updated annually. In Module 5, we discussed completing the transition grid correctly and ensuring that course of study is completed correctly, as well as making sure that all activities are listed in the grid. This module will cover writing measurable annual goals that are ensured to be linked or listed in the grid to support secondary transition planning. Let's take a look at the compliance language found in the file review under question 292C. Are the measurable annual goals related to the student's transition services? Let's look at what that means. Measurable annual goals are estimates of expected progress within a year. They should be based on present levels of both academic and functional performance. And again, we want to make sure that we use that baseline data to establish a goal that is achievable within 1 year. For every student aged 14 to 21 or turning 14 during the duration of the IEP, every measurable annual goal, or MAG, as well as the short-term objective, when appropriate, should support the student's post-secondary goals. Measurable annual goals should be skill building, and those should be based on identified needs. They should be prioritized. As a good rule of thumb, we recommend about 3 to 5 goals for most students. They should project student performance in terms of where they will be at the end of 1 year of instruction. They should also begin from a baseline skill, which is identified through assessment in the present levels. And they should contain measurable, countable data for progress monitoring. Let's talk about what measurable annual goals are not. They are not the curriculum objectives or subject area lessons. They are also not grade averages, test scores, or passing a course. They are also not days attended, and they are not the same as post-secondary goals.
Measurable annual goals must be skill building. Well, what does that mean? Those measurable annual goals must contain observable, measurable behaviors. In other words, we're looking at what you can count and what you can see. They must build skills needed for successful secondary transition. So when we're looking at the skills that are needed, we're looking at skills that will be needed beyond the high school. Now, some of those skills may need to be built while in middle school and high school that lead to success in post-secondary transition. And they may also include short-term objectives when it's appropriate. Here's some examples of skills that might be needed for secondary students: organizational skills and social skills, time management and communication skills, self-help skills, mobility or travel skills, self-determination and self-advocacy skills, and of course, academic skills. Measurable annual goals contain 3 parts. To help you remember that, we say CNBC: condition, the student's name, clearly defined behavior, and performance criteria. Let's start with a condition. All measurable annual goals must contain a condition that describes the situation in which the student will perform the behavior. So, are there accommodations that are needed or assistance that needs to be provided prior to or during the assessment? It also might describe materials that are used to evaluate the learning. It may describe the setting for the evaluation, for example, during lunch breaks, on the job, given picture checklists, given graphic organizers, using grade level passages, given a two-step direction, given a grocery list and $20, using the alarm feature on a cell phone. Next, the measurable annual goal must contain the student's name. That shouldn't be a problem. Sometimes it is. When we see copy and paste, sometimes we see names and pronouns misused. So be sure that the measurable annual goal for each individual student has the appropriate name and the appropriate pronoun. Measurable annual goals should use a clearly defined behavior. You might want to start using the PA core standards as the basis for some skills, but not all skills will be found here. Clearly defined behaviors should be measurable and observable. You should be able to see and count. Ask yourself these questions. What will the student actually do? Will they say something, print something, write something, read orally, point to something, or solve something? Here are some overused non-examples. Understand, know, recognize, behave, comprehend, and improve. Finally, the fourth part of measurable annual goals is the performance criteria, which contains 3 parts. First, we're looking at how well the student must demonstrate for mastery. In this section, we're looking at, will a student read 125 words or have 97% accuracy? Next is the number of times needed to demonstrate mastery. How consistently the student needs to perform the skill before it's considered mastered. So if a student does something once, it's unlikely that you'll see that that skill is mastered. As the creator of this goal, you'll need to take a look at how many times do we think this student needs to repeat that skill at this level in order to determine that the skill has been mastered. Finally, you'll need to include an evaluation schedule. How frequently the teacher plans to assess this skill, and how will the progress be measured? Sometimes this is every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, but it really shouldn't be any more than that. You also want to be careful about having an evaluation schedule that's too frequent. That makes it difficult for you to keep that evaluation schedule. If a student isn't in daily, you won't be able to collect the data daily. The performance criteria is a picture of what's happening over time.
To continue our conversation about measurable annual goals, we're going to switch over to our question and answer discussion. Our first question is, what happens if a measurable annual goal has been worked on for a year or more, and the student has not yet made success with that goal?
Great question. If a goal is not being achieved, really, the IEP team should be meeting to discuss the need to revise the IEP by adding specially designed instruction, changing accommodations and modifications, potentially changing the intervention being used, and/or revising the goal or condition to make it attainable for that student. Changes when a goal has not been met should be documented in the present education levels. A consideration for the IEP team should be, does the student possess the requisite skills needed to achieve the goal? If the answer is no, then the team should consider, through the use of data, what requisite skills are needed to be addressed. and modify that goal to reflect that need.
So we've been talking a lot about what constitutes a high quality measurable annual goal. And to that point, there are a lot of potential skills, right, and components of measurable annual goal. And what should a team prioritize in terms of these MAGs?
Well, Matt, sometimes it's hard to decide because you have students who have a lot of needs and you want to be able to meet all of them in one IEP, but we know that that's not possible. So the team really has to take a look at what are those skills that are mission critical skills needed to help that student move to the next step, building towards success, towards post-secondary transition. Teams should evaluate on a regular basis if the student is making ample progress, as Hillary recommended, towards building those necessary skills. And if not, then they need to take a look at, well, what is it that we do need in order to help that student move closer to that post-secondary goal? Some students may need, as we said, many skills. Some students may only need a few, but it really is the job of the IEP team, including the student, to make some determinations about what are the next set of skills that that student's going to need in order to move them closer to success.
And kind of continuing this conversation a little further, so we now, through our content today in our conversation, we've covered what constitutes, as we said, a high quality measurable annual goal, the components of them. And if we have a lot of team members working on that goal, can we have multiple IE members doing that? For example, we have speech, OT, PT, social skills. Can these all be worked on across the school day?
Yeah, absolutely. Different members of an IEP team can and should honestly be working on the same goal. This is a great way to get varied assessment data across settings and can also help with generalization of IEP goal progress. What we don't want to see is the student can only perform that skill for a specific staff member. We want to make sure that that skill is generalizable across classroom environments, work environments, and across the people who are demanding that the skill be demonstrated.
And for these measurable annual goals, is there a magic number or a recommended or suggested number for us to include and work on together?
That's another good question. Again, it depends on the student. We recommend that around 3 to 5 prioritized measurable annual goals be included in a student's IEP. And at this point, all of those measurable annual goals should be somehow related to the skills needed for post-secondary goals. So if a student's going to college, then we want to make sure that the skills that we're teaching are moving the student towards that. If a student is doing a home-based business, then we want to make sure that the skills that we're offering are leading to that. And as was mentioned earlier, OT, PT, speech should all be working together to create goals that lead towards that success in support of that student's post-secondary goals.
Great. So we hope that this question and answer discussion has further expanded some of these content and topics we've been talking about measurable annual goals today. Before we wrap up this video, we just want to remind you that if you have additional questions about the topic spoken and discussed today, you can head over to patent.net and access the secondary transition directory where you can get connected with a patent transition consultant to further talk about these topics and get guidance and support. One last thing to remind, that you'll need to use your PPID number in order to complete the post survey.